Well, again, I want to welcome everybody here, and we've been going through a series of teachings on the life of Jesus. We've been at this now for months and months and months, and I think we're about halfway now. So we're getting somewhere, and what I'd like to have you do is open your Bibles up and turn to Mark chapter 8. The passage that we're going to read today is, I think, a passage that, maybe the best way to say it is that it sort of turns a corner in the gospel of Jesus. Mark chapter 8, we're going to begin reading at verse 27. Now, if you don't have your own Bibles with you, I want to encourage you to pick up a Bible that's in one of the chairs in front of you or around you, and you'll find the passage that we're going to be reading on page 714. As you open up your Bibles to Mark chapter 8, I want to say of the Gospel of Mark, there's 16 chapters. So we're about halfway through the Gospel of Mark. The passage we're going to read is sort of a midpoint, a turning point. Just so you can understand how this Gospel works, the first 8 chapters cover the ministry of Jesus. They really, about a 3.5-year period of time. And past chapter 8, as we get into chapter 9 all the way to chapter 16, it's as though things slow down. Where in the first few chapters, there's like a 3.5-year period that's covered. In the last chapters, especially by the time we get to chapter 12, there's only going to be 1 week in the life of Jesus. So it's like the gospel writer Mark is slowing down because he wants to key us into what he thinks is really important. And I think he begins to turn that corner right here in the passage we're going to start reading. So Mark chapter 8, beginning in verse 27. Jesus and his disciples went on to the villages around Caesarea Philippi. On the way, he asked them, "Who do people say that I am?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others one of the prophets." "But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say that I am?" Peter answered, "You are the Christ." And it says in verse 30, Jesus warned them not to tell anyone about him. I want to pause and just take some time to slowly look at some of these words here. First, I want to draw your attention to 3 little words in verse 27 that I think otherwise would escape our attention if I didn't slow down and point them out. They're the words "on the way." It says, as verse 27 starts, Jesus and his disciples went on to the villages around Caesarea Philippi. And it says, on the way, he asked them, "Who do people say that I am?" I want to talk about those 3 words, on the way. And again, you may not catch these words or see their significance unless you were reading the entire Gospel of Mark. One of the things that's important in Mark is geography, and as we've been going through the life of Jesus, I haven't spent a lot of time talking about geography and where Jesus was and what he was doing, but I want to slow down and think a little bit about it because these words, on the way, I think, signify a turning point in this gospel. So it says that Jesus went with his disciples to the villages around Caesarea Philippi. I have a map up here on the screen. The majority of Jesus' ministry was spent around in the area of the Sea of Galilee. You see some of the towns, Capernaum, Gennesaret, Bethsaida, Magdala, you see Cana, Nazareth. These were the villages where Jesus spent the majority of his time. And so as you open up Mark's Gospel, you begin reading from chapter 1. Jesus spends the majority of his time around the Sea of Galilee. And this moment in chapter 8, he takes his disciples all the way to Caesarea Philippi, which is all the way about as far north as you can go in the land of Israel. Now, where Jesus spent his ministry around the Sea of Galilee, if you begin reading in Mark's Gospel, you see that basically he's all over the place. And I spent some time just for my own self this last week trying to trace out, if I was just to draw lines on a map, where Jesus is the first 8 chapters. The Gospel moves. There's sort of a buzz to it. He's here, then he's here. I spent some time drawing some lines, and I thought for your benefit I'd just show you the results of that. I mean, if you just open up the Bible, you begin to read it, and you just begin to trace it out, he's moving, he's all over, there's a buzz about what he's doing. He's going from place to place to place, and it doesn't seem like there's any pattern to it. I struggle. Okay, what's the pattern here? I don't see one. It seems that he has his own, he's moving here, according to the Word of God, but he's just, it's all over. And he's performing miracles, and people are coming, they're amazed, and he just moved from place to place. But as you get to chapter 8, what you find out is that he begins to hone in on what he's doing. And for the first time, in verse 27, you find these words, on the way. These words are then repeated again and again as you move forward in Mark's Gospel. Chapter 9, verse 33, but they kept quiet because on the way they had argued about who was the greatest. Chapter 10, verse 17, Jesus started on the way. Verse 32, they were on the way up to Jerusalem. Verse 52 of chapter 10, immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus on the way. If I was just to go back to this map here, what happens beginning in Caesarea Philippi, although Jesus has just been all over the place, when he goes there, it's as though he sets his mind resolutely to going to Jerusalem, where he will suffer, be crucified, and died. And the first time you find this phrase is right here in verse 27 of chapter 8. They were on the way. And so he's going to go from Caesarea Philippi. He's going to pass back through near the area of the Sea of Galilee and then head down to Jerusalem and Judea, where he is going to suffer and die. And it's as though at this moment in chapter 8, verse 27, instead of just going all over and doing all different things, he now has set his heart resolutely to going to suffer and die in Jerusalem. Does that make sense? One more thing. Says Jesus and his disciples went on to the villages around Caesarea Philippi. So you may have already figured out that if this is a turning point in the gospel, there's something interesting going on here. He's now taking his disciples to the northernmost town to ask him this very important question. A little bit about Caesarea Philippi. You may have already thought about this when you hear the words Caesarea Philippi, but this is a political capital and a place of power. What happened after Herod the Great died, he had 3 sons that succeeded him. Archelaus was down south in Jerusalem. He had Antipas, who we talked about around the Sea of Galilee. Then there was one more brother, Philip. And Philip decided that he would come to a place that was called Banias and make his capital city there. He renamed the town Caesarea Philippi. I think he must have been a brown noser because he named it after Caesar. I thought it was funny. And he must have also been pretty vain because he named it after himself, Philippi. Caesarea Philippi. This was his capital city. It was a place of political power. It was a place where the people who were happening were there. This was it. And you may ask yourself and begin to just have this question in your mind, why would Jesus take his disciples to this place to ask this very important question, who do others say that I am? And then who do you say that I am? A couple things about Caesarea Philippi, just so you know a little bit about the history of this city. And again, you may just, as you hear about these things, ask yourself, why would Jesus go here to talk to his disciples about his identity? I want to show you a modern-day picture of Caesarea Philippi. These are the ruins of where Caesarea Philippi were. You see there's a stream that's coming out of a cave. This is where the Jordan River starts. The waters actually come out of this cave. And another picture of the cave that you can see here. The cave actually in Jesus' day was much larger. There's been an earthquake since Jesus' day, and the cave's now smaller. But the waters, there's a spring that came out of that, and ancient writers said that no matter how far you could possibly try to dive down deep, you'd never touch bottom. They had no idea where the bottom was. And this caused all kinds of religious speculation. And when the Romans and the Greeks came and took over, they actually thought of this as a holy place. And in fact, if you begin to read Greek and Roman mythology, they had a particular god that they believed was born here. His name was Pan. Pan was the ancient god of like wild nature, fertility, and there are all kinds of religious practices that were carried out in this place as a result. Just moving forward, you can see